Thank you for checking out Lakehead International's videos. You're about to watch one of our Lakehead International live webinars, a fun and informative way to learn more about Lakehead while also meeting faculty, staff, and current students. If you have any questions throughout today's video, please comment below. Otherwise, let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to another Lakehead International Live. My name is Jordan Ball and I'll be your host today. Before I have the opportunity to introduce our special guest, I want to take an opportunity to say thank you to our audience for joining us. Whether this is the first live webinar that you've joined before or perhaps one of many that you've participated in the past year, we're excited to have you joining us once again for our International Lecture Showcase. Today, we're chatting a bit about nature-inspired engineering, and we're joined by our special guest, Dr. Khalid, who I'll introduce now. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jordan, for the introduction. My name is Mohammed Khalid, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical and Mechatronics Engineering. And it's really great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to interact with our international students potentially.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. I'm certainly excited about your session today. I know several of my colleagues were excited when they saw the list come through and saw your topic. And I'm sure that our audience will also be looking forward to learning more a bit about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me once again. My name is Mohammed Khalid. I'm an assistant professor in Mechanical and Mechatronics Engineering. And I have founded and I'm directing nature-inspired engineering research labs since I joined Lakehead University more than a year now. I have the pleasure of teaching different courses. So in mechanical engineering and mechatronics engineering, which I'm able to do because of my multidisciplinary background. So I think I just choose a topic which looks fascinating. We see many examples around us. One of the examples you can see on my screen is basically where you can see some different colored structures coming out of a plate. And I can tell you that these are the colored structures which are being controlled by a fish fin when it moves its tail in water. So just to give you a background of that, I would show you different examples first, which we can see in engineering design, which are actually inspired by nature. The first one is a very recent Airbus design of an airplane, passenger airplane, which is very much fascinated by a beluga whale. You can see like it's a beluga whale. Some other examples are where some of the big warplanes, they are inspired by birds. And you can see a Falcon inspired B-2 bomber airplane. Then you can see like a very recent bullet train in Japan that is kind of inspired. Its front part is inspired by the frontal part of a kingfisher. Uh, and then everyone, I think, in who you might have seen this sort of thing, right? A dog which is designed by Boston Dynamics, and they are improving it to further versions. So basically, with all those examples, I just wanted to give you an introduction that you can see all the applications where nature has played a big role in their design and development. So what I would do is that I would introduce you to my research theme first. I would give you different examples, and I would go through a scientific process which we usually adopt whenever we try to think about any design or development project. And then I would take an example from a fish. I would also explain how we have gone through the same process to design some energy harvesting systems. And basically, what is important for us in the whole thing is the multidisciplinary approach. So, my central research theme is that I want to look into those natural systems which are already there in nature in terms of propulsion and energy harvesting, which also cover the broad areas of aerodynamics and hydrodynamics. And the understanding is that I want to study those objects so that I can propose new designs for engineering systems, as well as we can suggest some improvements in the existing engineering systems. So a couple of some of the examples which I can tell you and share with you is coming from the biology. You can see like a heart kind of structure where the blood is being pumped. And this is basically a computer simulation where one of the colleagues and a collaborator at Villanova University, they were just trying to see the whole thing. And then you can see like how we are looking at the aerodynamics of a butterfly, how it flies. At the same time, you can see a bee kind of thing, how you can see like how well it controls the vortex dynamics around it. The flow structures are very important to control to produce those necessary forces, which I would explain by taking an example of a fish. And this is basically my work, which I'm showing you as a sample, where a fish is kind of sending some flow structures in the wake to produce the necessary forces. And I would explain this thing. I would take this example to further go into my lecture. So my story, actually, how I went into this whole nature-inspired engineering thing started with beetles and bugs. And back in 2012, 11, in the summer, I was a PhD student, and my advisor asked me, like, you should find a good research topic which has an impactful, has an impact on the engineering systems in future. So I remember I kept thinking about different things, and I couldn't come up to anything for weeks and weeks. And one day when I was entering the university where I was doing my PhD in Pakistan, I saw this beetle and I went after this beetle. I think I was chasing this kind of beetle for an hour or so just to make sure that whatever I observed is correct. And the observation was that this beetle has its flapping wings, if you can see my cursor, under rigid wings. So you see, like, and my observation was that how come this beetle can fly with two rigid wings with such a small weight, and it is not moving at a higher frequency, these rigid wings, but these uh, membranous wings, these flexible wings, they are moving at a with a higher amplitude, with a more prominent motion. So I went after that, and I thought, like, this is a great PhD topic. I should try to understand its aerodynamics, and I should see like how this pair of wings can help the beetle control the aerodynamic forces which are necessary to propel itself, at the same time which can help it carry its weight. And it is very agile. I mean, it is very maneuverable. So I wanted to understand this thing. So this is where my journey with nature-inspired engineering started from. So whenever we look at such a thing, I can tell you, like, there is a golden circle thing which we usually keep in mind. And the golden circle has three different levels. And the three different levels actually covers three different important questions. The important questions are what, how, and why. And when I say what, it means that what is the purpose of the research? Why should we do it? Does it have an impact, or because we don't want to do research just for the sake of research, right? It has to be something like an impactful and influential thing on the engineering design. And then the biggest question after that thing is that how should we find out the answers for the questions which we have in our mind? And this is what is covered by this phrase, how. And thirdly, when we go through different sort of like tests, experiments, simulations, and all those activities, it is very important for us to understand that what does that data tell us, and how we can use that data to answer the questions which we had previously in our mind. And sometimes what happens is, like, that data gives answers, and sometimes that data produce new questions. So you see, which become even more important. So we have to have that thing in our mind. So usually when I see engineering, this is the phrase which I would borrow from my PhD advisor. He used to tell that an engineer should be able to predict the behavior of the system as well as to control its behavior. So by using this approach and always keeping that lesson in mind, we follow a certain path of scientific thought process, which I'm going to explain in the next slide. So before that, I would show you these set of pictures from different fish. You can see, like, we usually see a lot of fish in nature, right? And you can see, like, these are very thin fish, like a lamprey or eel sort of thing. You might have seen trout, mackerel, bass, boxfish. And their physiology is different. But at the same time, we should keep in mind that their wavy kinematics is also different. The way they produce the wavy motion along its body, it's very different. And what we do is that as we go from left to right, we see that the wavelength along the body reduces, it changes. So I just had that observation in my mind, you see. And I wanted to understand that why does it happen? Is it something because of hydrodynamics? Is it because of some sort of like biological evolution? Is it just like a random thing? And the second important question for me was that can we design a bio-inspired vehicle or bio-inspired underwater robot which can actually surpass the hydrodynamic performance of these fish? So in order to understand this thing, we have to study the fish first, right? So that is one example. So I observed that thing. I had that question in my mind. And then I followed a scientific method. The scientific method, the first question is that we have an observation. And that observation gives us certain questions in our mind. And then that basically leads us to a certain hypothesis. So you see, like we have a specific research aim in our mind. And in order to understand it further and in order to find its answer, we either perform experiments or we do simulations, right? And after doing that, we draw some conclusions. So you see, so this is how we follow the whole scientific process in our teaching, in our research. And after having the conclusions, as I said, like in order to make further improvements, we go into another question. So this cycle continues in the life of an engineer or a researcher. So I would give you an example based on what I have just discussed on the previous slide. For observation and questions, I had this thing in mind that there are so many fish in nature. Why do they have certain sort of expertise and physiologies and kinematics or motion, which is basically making them a great swimmer? So I made a hypothesis. I said that are the physiology and kinematics of different fish connected? So that was basically a research question in my mind. And how do I try to find that answer is through my integrated experimental computational approach. Like I would perform some experiments for something, and then I would also perform some sort of like computations in order to find the answers for my questions. And I came to a conclusion where I said, yes, there is some sort of like, there is a method to this madness, you see? Like, and basically the fish has gone through this whole uh, evolution process to have a certain sort of physiology, and they move according to what suits their hydrodynamics. So I would explain this thing that this knowledge is very important for us to design a superior bio-inspired underwater robot, which I usually call in my way. I mean, I call it a superfish. So I would explain this thing. And as I say, like sometimes we have to go for experimental approaches. Sometimes we have to go for computational approaches. And in terms of computational and experimental approaches, they have their own benefits. Like for example, in experiments, uh, we can have like real time, it's more natural, and it gives us some sort of like understanding about the system without making any scientific assumptions. But there are limitations. Like for example, I cannot tell the fish that can you please swim like an eel now, and at the other instant, can you please swim like a trout now, so that I understand what you are doing with the flow. So I cannot do that, you see. So I have to go for computational approaches where I can describe any material properties for any system. I can describe any sort of motion or any sort of physiology. So this is what my approach is, that I would adopt to experiments whenever I need to, and I would switch to simulations whenever I need to. So the biggest thing is that we can really provide a deep insight into the behavior of the system using both approaches. So here is an example. We have got this high-speed image reconstruction data for a jackfish from one of the collaborators at Harvard University and University of Virginia. And then we looked at its, like we reconstructed its whole geometry, we reconstructed its whole kinematics. And then this is our solver. Like you can see, this is a virtual water tunnel, you can say. And we ran those simulations on supercomputer. And this is basically a original kinematics. And in order to change its kinematics, I have to follow a certain mathematical equation, right? So we have developed this mathematical equation. And based on this mathematical equation, you see like here you have for a certain wavelength, this fish following the mathematical expression in terms of its motion exactly copies what we see in reality, right? So that is now it gives me the opportunity to change different parameters in those mathematical equations and see the behavior. So in order to convince the community that my mathematical expression actually works, I just don't need to be look into it. I have to compare the two things. Like, for example, you see those 4 different points, and I'm seeing the motion with respect to time of those 4 different types, which I get from the reality, a real case, and which I get from the prescribed motion. So you see, like we are matching the performance. So in terms of like mathematical model for the motion of the fish, it's very accurate. So you see, like I'm changing the wavelength of the fish, and I want to see why it is having this wavelength in reality. Does it give it some sort of like hydrodynamic advantage? This is what I want to see. So we have basically looked into its thrust production capacities and the drag forces which it experiences when it swims. I would not go deep into the details, but here you can see like this is a thrust. On the y-axis, you can see thrust. On the x-axis, you can see wavelength. So in terms of thrust, we can see that what we find in reality that gives us the maximum thrust, right? And even if we go for a higher wavelength or a lower wavelength, the thrust is not that much. So it means that nature is already kind of providing us some sort of like optimal solution in terms of connection between physiology and kinematics. So this is what basically inspires a natural design. At the same time, here I am looking at drag of the main trunk. I'm looking at the drag of the anal fin and the dorsal fin. And we are analyzing all their data to get some conclusions. And the conclusions are that the tail of the fish, which is known as caudal fin, perform the best for thrust. And all other components, their drag reduces as this fish increases its wavelength. So it means that nature has some sort of like, the fish has actually learned some lessons from that evolutionary process according to its physiology. So I'm just showing you the animation which we reconstructed from these simulations, and you can see all the flow structures around it. And those flow structures, I can tell you, like the fish is expert in controlling all the big and small flow structures. And just to see like what we extracted out of it as a researcher and engineer, I'm showing you one glimpse of what we studied for each flow structure here. So you see, like we are looking at all those flow structures separately, and we are seeing like how they are interacting with each other, how they are producing different sort of forces, why they are going into a certain kind of sync with each other. So, I mean, this is the whole engineering approach which we followed over there. We have also done a same thing for another kind of swimmer, which is like an anguilliform swimmer. And now the example is an eel, which is like a snake. And eel is very different from the previous fish because here the eel is using a very low wavelength as compared to its body length. So we also looked into this thing and we ran its simulations using a similar kind of mathematical equation which I showed for the previous fish. I changed the wavelength, and remember that this luxury is not available to me in experiments. So we have run those simulations and we came up uh, with the conclusion that eel would swim with a lower wavelength because this physiology suits that kinematics in terms of producing more hydrodynamic advantages. So I can tell you, similarly, I have shown you the vortex structures for the previous fish. We have actually studied the vortex structure production for different wavelengths for this fish as well. So this is basically what engineering analysis in terms of propulsion is. We are also working on developing a manta ray bot at Lakehead University, and the work I'm going to show you now is basically was done by a group of undergrad students with me in their capstone design project. Just they have just graduated. So you see, like this is a manta ray, and we wanted to develop that manta ray bot. So we are running some simulations. We are reconstructing the whole thing, the motion of the wing. So you see, like we are reconstructing it into a simulation environment, and we are trying to understand that how many forces are required or how strong the fin should be to push water from its wings, right? So And then we are looking at different sort of, I would say, not very sophisticated experiments to produce those that Mantare bought. These are the 3D printed parts, which we came up after some sort of like conceptualization. Uh, and then you can see like not a very sophisticated experiment. We could understand like how much stresses need to be there and how strong the material should be for this robot, right? So we came up with our experiments in terms of like converting weights into quantifying the stresses, and we came up like with a factor of safety of 7.45 for our robot. And these are the wings, which was produced by the 3D prints of a mold. You can see the mold over there. And we have selected the geometry based on a real Mantare bot. We just scaled it down. Uh, and this is the final product which they made. And we just tested it into a pool as well. So we made a short video and it was running fine. But the biggest problem now as a mechanical engineer for us was to how to communicate with the robot when it goes underwater. So this is what we need to figure it out next year. So anyways, but I mean, this is basically, this gives us some confidence that the approach which we followed, that worked in terms of producing propulsion, which are basically with the required characteristics.
I'll pause here,
So
Dr. Khalid. We have a few questions before we get too far away from your discussion related to the fish and how they swim. The first one was, where do you do simulations, the experiments you talked about that are actually done with real fish versus computational ones? Is there a lab on campus, or do you go outdoors to a lab, or is there facilities that you use or your colleagues use?
yeah. So in terms of computational solver, we have developed our own solver that is in-house. And basically it's I would show you another example when I would talk about the energy harvesting part of this lecture. That solver is in-house, that is fully parallelized, and we run our simulations on Compute Canada facilities managed by Digital Research Alliance of Canada. I mean, all my students in the lab, they are trained on using and developing that software. We are actually developing different modules of it. In terms of getting those experiments, as far as the robot experiment is concerned, that is something which we do by ourselves. But to get that high-speed data, we have collaborations in different countries. So, I mean, we don't need to do everything by ourselves. This is why we build partnerships, right? And this is what basically adds much more strength into our program. And the experimental data is obtained from our collaborators, and the computational environment, yes, that is something which is being used by our own code.
Interesting. And then another question came in and said, in addition to analyzing movement, do you also analyze the physiology of the fish, like the surface of their scales, etc., which may influence hydrodynamics?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. Uh, as far as my research is concerned, I have looked into the role of different sort of fins and wings and basically the geometric features. But in terms of scales, I have not done it. But one of my collaborators has just published a paper on this concept, like what does those small scale features uh, uh, basically do in terms of producing more hydrodynamic forces. So yes, I mean, that is a very interesting question, which has one of the collaborators has just attempted to answer that.
That's interesting. I'm sure that you're looking to marry those two concepts in the near future,
Yes,
perhaps, and then
exactly.
see what a full scale research project would bring at that point. I believe there may be one more question in the Q&A. This one is from Hung. It says, do you think when it comes to nature-based engineering, is material science a bigger roadblock, or is computational analysis a bigger challenge for engineers?
I would say both have their own advantages and both have their own, I would say, roles to play a part. And we cannot disintegrate the two things. And you would see that in my lecture at the end, I would focus more on to the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach, where even we do not know what are the boundaries between different disciplines are. Right. So in terms of, yes, in terms of material science, different people try to understand that how material surfaces which are there in the natural skins play a bigger role. And scales is also one example, because we know that fish skins, they have those scales which can help them understand the disturbances in the flow. So, I mean, in terms of simulations, it might be hard for us to replicate the same environment. But yes, maybe material scientists would be would be more appropriate persons to look into that problem.
I mean, it comes back to something you said at the very beginning of the webinar, making sure that everyone's approach is multidisciplinary. So
Yes.
it's not just a mechanical and mechatronics engineering individual working on a single research project. It's a team of collaborators that are bringing
Yes.
their wealth of knowledge and expertise. There's one more
Exactly.
question in here, but I'm going to save it because I think it's going to be really interesting to be answered after you share a bit more about nature-inspired and energy harvesting. So I'll let you
Sure.
continue on in the PowerPoint you've developed so far. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. So now I would talk about the part of this lecture which is on energy harvesting. So I have taken this GIF simply from Wikipedia just to give you an understanding how those energy harvesting systems actually work. You might have seen different sort of like wind turbines on rooftops. Sometimes while traveling by air, you might have seen it in the ocean. Uh, and those wind turbines, they now have become a big resource in terms of producing renewable energy and to deal with the limitations and the risks which are attached with the fossil-based fuels. So we are working on a very important problem related to vertical axis wind turbine. I mean, this is the third one, which is at the rightmost position. There is a bigger problem which is related to this wind turbine, and the problem relates to its self-starting capability. Like sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, people would have to attach some sort of like pushing mechanism to make that turbine run. And then it would be able to produce some sort of power. So we are working on a problem where we want to understand how this turbine interacts with the incoming air so that we can improve its self-starting ability. So we are looking into that using our computational approach. And in terms of answering that question, I would get back to the fish school. So you see, like we are seeing a side view of a fish school. So I thought like whenever fish move in those configurations, they move really fast, honestly. Like if you look at their rotational speed, they move really fast. So I thought, okay, we can have the same concept and we can introduce something which is like a multi-stage wind turbine. So in terms of multi-stage wind turbine, we have added another set of rotors within the primary rotor. And we performed simulations. And in terms of producing those simulations, we were looking at how different flow structures are produced by those uh, different configurations of vertical axis wind turbine, and whether having an other circular arrangement of the rotors inside the primary rotor, can it improve its self-starting performance? So I would not go deep into, because of the time constraint, I would not go into the results, but I can show you one animation of the flow structures which are being produced in the wake of a single rotor vertical axis wind turbine. We have already published this paper, and I can tell that up to like 15% improvement in terms of self-starting ability was obtained by introducing this rotor. So we are going to test it in the experiments as well very soon. One of my grad students is working on it. So we hope to report those results also by the end of this summer. So for other resources which we are working on in terms of using computational simulations mostly, is based on how different structures interact with different sort of fluids, like water, like wind. So, and we also need to see that we don't have to produce power at a bigger scale. That is not the case always. We have to look at micro power generators as well, so that we can use them in different scenarios. Sometimes we have small scale applications. Sometimes we just have to power a wireless sensor. We don't have to go deep into like the bigger things in terms of powering a building or a home. So we are also working on that account as well. So I would show you some examples. Here you can see a wing, which is inside a wind tunnel. And in response to its interaction with the wind, it can produce a certain amount of voltage. You can see that. So that I have taken it from YouTube just to help you understand the process. And then this is known as a flutter phenomena, where wing does this thing. Then you can see like there is a concept which is being evolved now, where we can use the similar wings at the riverbed or basically in the bed of the lake. We are basically also working on developing this sort of farms. And then finally, I would show you one conceptual figure where people can develop those farms and produce big amount of energy from the waves of rivers and oceans. So in order to do that, we have to perform either experiments or computations. So usually, because my own research is mostly on computations, so the previous models, they are mostly uncoupled. Uncoupled means that they would solve a fluid part differently, then they would solve the structural part at the next time instant, then they would solve the equations related to electrical energy in another time instant. So what we have done is that we have developed the fully coupled solver. And that coupled solver basically gives us a good estimate or a better estimate in comparison to the previously reported models in terms of producing unsteady forces and the structural dynamics parameters, like what should be the stiffness, what should be the damping, what should be the mass, and then how much electricity should be produced. Because if we start doing those experiments right away, I mean, it would take a lot of cost. So you see, like it would take a lot of resources as well. So we have to perform all those simulations. So we have developed this in-house solver, which is like Vortex 3D. I have named it. And this is a fully parallel immersed boundary method-based solver, which is like an advanced computational techniques to look at the fluid structure interaction problems. And we are basically using it for fish propulsion, for basically for energy harvesting systems. And we are also enhancing its capability in terms of looking at different multiphysics problems. And a few examples I would show you in the next slide. So in terms of when I say like we have developed the solver, I would just show you the equations which we have actually solved. Because engineering, mathematics is the language of engineering, right? So I mean, these are the equations. I don't want to explain all the differentials and integrals. This is something which we definitely love to do when we see you in the class. So that would give us an opportunity then. But we actually solve those mathematical equations to study those systems. So some of the other examples which you would find in engineering design, you might have seen it. This is something which is like a whale wing inspired blade design for big wind turbines. Then we can see like people have just reported that a reduction of 32% has been seen from this nature inspired design in a big wind turbine. You can see if you just attach some sort of like owl wing inspired appendages with a wind turbine blade, it can significantly reduce the tonal noise, which is basically causing a lot of health related, mental health related problems for the communities which live near those wind turbine farms. So owl inspired designs of blades, that is another example. And this is something which, I mean, I just took a snapshot from a news article which reported that. And there, again, the fish school, people are designing wind farms using the configurations of the fish schools. So this is another example which you can find in different areas. So coming to the multi, inter, or transdisciplinary approaches, which is like a basic takeaway from my lecture, I would say. The difference is that in multidisciplinary things, we maintain the boundaries between different disciplines. Like, for example, civil engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, we maintain boundaries, right? Like, for example, if we are developing a collaboration between different researchers, mechanical engineers would say, like, I would only focus on this thing, which is like mechanical related. And the civil engineering person would say, okay, this is my domain, I'm not going to cross it. But you are working together, you see, like one is providing an input to the other. And for interdisciplinary thing, boundaries are blurred. Like just like an example of a stew, boundaries are blurred. But for transdisciplinary things, you don't know what are the boundaries. It's completely a mixed effort, right? So usually when I teach courses, I advise students, like this is my first and foremost advice for the student. Build fundamental knowledge. If you understand the fundamental concepts, it would become very easy for you to deal with different scenarios, even to deal with different systems coming from different backgrounds. Like, for example, you would see like Newton's second law cannot be violated, right? Similarly, voltage law, Kirchhoff's voltage law cannot be violated. Energy principle cannot be violated. So if you keep applying those fundamental principles into different domains, it would give you a lot of leverage in terms of developing your thought process, which is like multi, inter, or transdisciplinary. And in today's world, it becomes very, very important. So I would give you another example from mechatronics, where different disciplines are being combined into a single discipline. And you see like it has some part of digital control, computer systems, mechanical, electrical control systems. So there are like different systems, and at the interface of all those disciplines, mechatronics engineering lie. And with this realization, we at Lakehead University have introduced this mechatronics engineering program, where we are, I think I'm not sure about the application deadline, but I'm sure many of you would have joined this mechatronics engineering program. So we have done that thing. So keeping that thing in mind, this multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach in mind, I have developed my roadmap for the future research. Like, for example, we are working on fluid structure acoustic interactions, like how these flow-induced noise play different roles in engineering design. So I got a grant from ANSERC in 2022 to work on that thing. We have developed the solver, actually. We are running it, we are using it for different cases. I have also got a grant last year from ANSERC to uh, add a uh, chemical odor dynamics module into my solver to understand that how fish would use these different odor-based sensing mechanism for their propulsion. We are also working on some machine learning and deep learning models for flow sensing applications to bring it into the robot, which we are trying to develop. At the same time, we are looking at fluid structure thermal interaction, fluid structure acoustic interaction for biomedical applications as well. And we are also looking into something where we can use drones to deal with wildfires, because this is becoming a big problem in nature, and which is related to like climate change. So this is the roadmap for me, at least for the next, you can say 3-4 years, where my lab would be doing research in. So in terms of collaborations, as I say, like we are human beings, we have our limitations. So we develop partnerships. So I can tell you, like, my lab works in partnership with different renowned universities across the globe. We are working with 3 different universities within Canada, 3 universities in the US. You can see the universities in UK. We are also working in Norway. This is why I am in Norway right now. So I mean, I'm on a research mobility grant visit here. And then we are participating in Academics Without Borders program for developing the renewable energy resources in Africa. We are working with Middle Eastern universities. We are working with Pakistani universities. At the same time, we are also in partnership with Chinese universities, Singapore, and Australian universities. So different students, I developed that route to give exposure to my own students so that they can also learn about different cultures and work with other people and develop and polish their abilities. Because the purpose is not to just sit into the lab and answer different questions. The purpose is to develop network, to learn from different people as well. So you can see, like, this is my group right now. Uh, I mean, we were celebrating the birthday of a couple of guys, and yeah, I owe a big thanks to my postdoc fellows, grad and undergrad students, many collaborators, colleagues, and friends. And at the same time, I think I would also pay my thanks to the funding agencies which are supporting our research. Yeah, so thank you so much for your patience. I hope I was able to finish right in time, and I would be happy to answer your questions if you have any.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I certainly appreciate the time you've taken out. As you noted, you're traveling right now, so even more appreciated that you were able to find some time to share your knowledge and impart some learning on all of us, especially myself as a business grad at Lakehead. A lot of that was new to me. A lot of the math was overwhelming. It left me a little foggy in the head, but that's okay. That's why you're here to answer some questions now. So going back to the one I had saved, and I thought would be really interesting to hear from your perspective because it's sort of new to an extent, but it's evolving so quickly. It says, how will AI applications, can they be useful in such research if applicable?
So this is a very interesting question. With the AI, I mean, everyone talks about AI these days. And uh, I mean, when I see this problem, usually we see it from the first thing which comes to my mind as a computational engineer, where I would pay attention to experiments to little extent. So the first thing is that we have to run those simulations. I mean, the simulations which I have seen you over there for days, sometimes for weeks. So we are looking into developing those AI-based models which can reduce the time required to run those simulations. That is the first thing. The second thing is that AI has great tools to develop control approaches because AI is also based on learning from different systems, right? When you learn some sort of machine learning model, you have to train the network, you have to train the model so that it can follow the same practices in other scenarios which are unseen at that specific time instant. So in terms of developing control techniques, a lot of advancement is being done on that account too. At the same time, we also use AI tools for optimization, like how we can optimize without running too many simulations, too many experiments, how we can use AI tools to build better optimization models. So these are the few examples which I can give you.
For sure. I think this next question may also perhaps segue into following up with how AI could assist, but it says, as I understand it, the more detailed a simulation, the more resource hungry it is to operate. Where do you think the optimal range is? And they further explain, like with your jackfish and eel model simulation, you were able to nearly mimic the animal, but whereas your manta ray robot is comprised of a few rigid body parts. So where
Yeah,
do you find that optimal range and how do you determine what is optimal, I guess?
and this is I would say this is like a difficult question to answer, honestly. Why? Because we have to be really develop the scope in our mind, like what question we want to answer, right? And we would only develop the experimental or computational setups based on answering those questions. So I can tell you when I was running the simulations for this jackfish, we were running the simulations for uh, this eel. We also ran a couple of simulations for manta ray. I can tell you like we were looking into reducing the number of simulations because it is important for us to save time. You see, like every simulation would take days that we don't want to. But now, because that is why we have also added the capability of parallelization into our solver. Like we are taking advantage of this parallelized solver where we can run the simulation on parallel multiple cores, and that can significantly reduce the time. So for example, the simulations which we were running in 1 week, maybe previously, we are just running it in a day. So, I mean, we have started running those simulations on supercomputers. So this is what one advantage we are doing. The other thing is that people are also developing different, I would say, different techniques based on the advanced infrastructure of computational resources so that their computational time can even be further reduced. So, I mean, it depends, honestly, what research question we are trying to answer. It also depends what resources are there in terms of the availability for running those simulations. But I think, yeah, I mean, we are not in a hurry, I would be honest, to develop those reduced order models because we are getting a lot of information from our existing net frameworks.
For sure. Good to hear. Um, I'll encourage you, Dr. Khalid, to open the Q&A if you can on your end. We have
Yeah.
a student that posed a question, Labla, and I'm not sure of one of the words that she's used, and I think that you may
Yes.
be more familiar with it. So I'll let you read it to the audience and
Yes.
then answer.
Sure. So the first question is that could the biomimicry of manta rays be adapted for aerial drones or other flying machines? The answer is yes. And I think I can share that we are looking into such a thing where we can develop a hybrid robot, a manta ray like thing. But at the same time, one thing which we should keep in mind that it is very challenging topic to design such a hybrid vehicle or a hybrid robot because in water you want to have uh, flexible wings, right? But in air, you don't want those flexible wings. At the same time, the forces which can be produced in air to propel something and in water, they are very different. The propulsion mechanism in air, you may need a small fan at the back of the fin or in the front of the vehicle. So you need to see, like, there are different questions which you need to understand and answer. So this is what we are trying to address now. But yes, I mean, this is basically a very good potential area to work on.
For sure. And I'm sure it probably may come up in your future research as you look to fight forest fires with drones, perhaps.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
This next question from Angela says, you've mentioned that you have students working on your projects. Is there a possibility to join the team? So I guess in this case, I'll encourage you, you don't have to answer how to join your team, but maybe chat a bit about how students get involved in
Yeah.
research with you, but also research in general within engineering. I know that you're one of many, many professors that has research opportunities. So perhaps if you can share broadly how students get involved here.
Yeah. So, I mean, usually when we teach different courses, undergrad students, they are like, I would say, because they are not, they are understanding the fundamental concepts in the beginning. So usually when I teach courses, and I'm sure every professor would do that, they would bring in their research as examples to the students, and then they would help them understand the insightful information which is embedded there in their research. So this is where, I mean, sometimes students, let's say, get attracted to some specific area, they find their interest over there. And the biggest thing is that I would really suggest that do not shy. Just contact the professor. Professors are, I mean, they are always in search of students to work on different projects, and approach them. And I mean, they would be, most of the time, I would say always, they are very welcoming in giving you the opportunity. It just depends that how much training do you need um, for working on a specific project, and what stage you are at in terms of your academics. So, but we are open. And for example, if you find any specific area interesting to you, just talk to the professor and do not shy away.
I think that also goes to say for students that join us perhaps at the undergraduate level and are not quite sure whether or not they want to pursue further education. So maybe a master's is on their mind, but they haven't said yes or no definitively. Getting involved in these opportunities, whether it's a volunteer opportunity or perhaps summer work opportunity, that will help you probably determine and narrow down whether or not it's the right fit. You certainly could join one of these research teams and think, this is really cool. Like, I think I need to pursue this as a career. And in the same breath, you could also join and say, I don't think I'm cut out for this. I think I'd rather
Yeah,
do more of a straightforward career
yeah.
that doesn't necessarily involve research. So, I
No,
mean,
just
it's a good opportunity.
Yeah, just to add to my answer, I mean, the first question which we usually ask the student whenever we are approached by a student to work in our team, we ask them, like, what do you want to do after your academics, like the degree? Do you want to do your MSc or PhD, or do you want to do an industrial job? Because both things, they require a bit of different skill sets. There is a much of overlap, I would say, but at the same time, you have to be having different skills, slightly different skills. So this is what we really focus on in terms of providing training to the students.
Awesome. And one of the last questions we got here is another one from Hung. It says, when a living organism is in motion, its nervous system allows for constant subconscious micro adjustments to adapt to the current environment. Do you think that even with a near carbon copy reconstruction of that organism digitally, can actual physical products fully utilize your research and learnings?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, and I would say, like, this is something which is really stretching the boundaries of the bio-inspired work right now. Because whenever we solve those mathematical equations, we develop those equations based on certain fundamental principles. So we understand those principles as far as big scale uh, objects are concerned, or big scale things are concerned. Like, for example, I'm using my solver for working with the biological things like cardiac vascular systems. At the same time, we are working with swimming of sperms in blood. We are also working on, like, red blood cells, things like that. So we have gone to that level in terms of understanding the principles. How we can mimic it into, like, a subconscious micro adjustment kind of system, that is something which I really have to see. Honestly, I do not know much about it because I have not yet read the principles of it. So once we understand the principle, it becomes very obvious for us, okay, we can develop this mathematical model and this is what we can incorporate in our simulation.
Something that came to mind as I'm reflecting on earlier parts of your presentation was the sample you shared of Boston Dynamics and
Yes.
their robot today in comparison to when I'm sure it was sort of the buzz of the world on any news channel you flipped to, you saw their initial robot that I mean, looking back at it, it was incredible for its time, but in comparison to what they've been able to evolve into, I think I remember a news reporter pushing the robot over and it fell over.
Yeah.
Now the robot that they've been able to train through consistent learning and in this case micro adjustments, I'm sure you could go up and push it over and it might tumble, but it will pick itself back up. So
Yes,
it's
exactly.
that continued learning, and I'm thinking that that's a
Yeah.
long process to say the least. Takes a
Yeah.
lot of
And when I
resources.
mentioned exactly, and when I mentioned the AI-based control, this is where it is really, really helpful. I mean, in terms of AI, because it becomes a probabilistic kind of control, you see. It doesn't have to be deterministic.
Alrighty, there's one more question here. It says, do you need to have a research background before you can apply? So I'll answer a bit about that. If you're applying to one of our undergraduate programs, so a bachelor's degree, you don't need a research background to join one of the programs. You certainly would need the prerequisite courses. So coming into our engineering courses, we typically encourage students to have their English, of course, their math, and then some of our other courses or programs do have prerequisites that are more geared towards the sciences. All of that is publicly available and listed on our website, so you can explore further for admission requirements. If you are joining one of our grad programs, we'll certainly be looking for students that come from a similar background or share a similar passion. In this case, I know, for example, students that may have done an undergrad in computer science or biotechnology, they may be well suited to then go into a program like mechatronics engineering, provided that their passions fall within that realm and not necessarily more towards the data science of computer science. Do you have anything to add in terms of encouraging students what research or what background knowledge they should have if they're applying at the graduate level?
Yeah, I think you need to have some prerequisite knowledge about mathematics in terms of because you need to understand the differential equations. You need to understand programming as well. At the same time, you need to know what fluid mechanics fundamental knowledge are. What are those concepts? How do you look at different systems? But yeah, I mean, we can cover different things in our own lab during our training program, but there are definitely some prerequisites, as you also mentioned.
For sure. With that being said, folks, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to Dr. Khalid for joining us and sharing so much knowledge about nature to inspire engineering. I think that was a fascinating session, and it's really exciting to see the research that's being conducted at Lakehead and in collaboration with countless universities and institutions across the world. I think that that's incredible to showcase also the level of collaboration that we have here at Lakehead. So thank you for joining us, and to our team behind the scenes that is helping run today's webinar and support all of the other questions. Thank you for your help. With that being said, folks, it's time to wrap things up. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you at an upcoming event. Bye for now.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, I want to encourage you to comment below or connect with us on social media. We can be found at Lakehead International on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for watching once again, and hopefully we'll see you at the next live webinar. Bye for now.